The gunshot that echoed across the valley that autumn morning in 1879 wasn't meant to kill anyone, but it sure as hell drew a line in the dust that Olivia Warren thought would never be crossed. She stood on the eastern half of what used to be her father's land, watching a crew of hired hands hammer fence posts into the hard Nevada soil, while the man responsible for splitting her inheritance right down the middle supervised from horseback. Everett Bishop sat tall in the saddle, his dark hair catching the late September sun, his jaw set in that stubborn way that made her want to throw something at his handsome face. The land stretched out around them in shades of brown and gold, sagebrush dotting the hills that rolled toward distant mountains. Piotch sat 5 miles south, a silver mining town that had exploded with fortune seekers and violence in equal measure over the past 8 years. That fence line cuts right through the best grazing land, Olivia called out, her voice carrying across the distance between them. She was 22 years old and had spent every one of those years learning this land from her father before consumption took him 6 months ago. The cattle need access to the creek on both sides. Everett turned his horse, a bay gelding that moved with the easy grace of an animal well trained. At 25, he had already made a name for himself as one of the most skilled ranch hands in Lincoln County, before her father's lawyer had dropped the bombshell that changed everything. According to the will, Miss Warren, half this land is mine. Your father saw fit to leave it to me for 10 years of loyal service. I'm just making sure we both know where our property begins and ends. The words stung because they were true. Her father, in his final weeks, had divided the homestead equally between his only daughter and the cowboy he had come to see as a son. Olivia understood the gesture even as it infuriated her. Everett had worked harder than any man she had ever known, had stayed when others drifted on, had sat with her father through those last terrible nights when breathing became a battle. But understanding didn't make the reality any easier to swallow. "A fence won't change the fact that we need to work together," she said, walking closer. Her skirts kicked up dust with each step, and she was grateful for the practical brown fabric rather than anything fancy. Out here, pretty things died quick deaths. The cattle don't care about property lines. The weather doesn't care. When winter comes, we'll need every advantage we can get. Then I suggest you keep your cattle on your side, and I'll keep mine on mine. Everett's blue eyes met hers, and something flickered there that might have been regret or might have been simple stubbornness. "This is the cleanest way, Miss Warren. No confusion, no arguments about who owns what. Except we'll be arguing about everything else." Olivia stopped a few feet from his horse, tilting her head back to look at him. Water rights, grazing rotation, the use of the barn and the equipment. "You really think a fence solves any of that?" "I think it's a start." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that was equal parts respectful and dismissive. "Good day, Miss Warren." She watched him ride toward the western half of the property, toward the smaller cabin that had once housed seasonal workers and would now be his home. Her own house, the one her father had built with his own hands 20 years ago when Nevada was still wild and Piotch was just a dream of silver, sat on the eastern boundary. The fence would run right between them, splitting the land like a scar. Olivia turned back to her own work, her own crew of 2 hired men who were busy repairing the roof of the main barn before the weather turned. Miguel had been with her father almost as long as Everett, a quiet man in his 50s who knew horses better than most people knew their own families. His nephew, Carlos, was learning the trade at 19, all eager energy and quick smiles. "That fence is a mistake," Miguel said as she approached. He was mending a bridle, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Your father would not have wanted this." My father left half his land to a cowboy instead of his daughter, Olivia said, hearing the bitterness in her own voice and hating it. I'm not sure I know what he wanted anymore. He wanted you to have help. Miguel's dark eyes were kind but firm. He knew this land is too much for one person. He trusted Everett like a son. Then he should have left me a brother, not a rival. Olivia took the bridle from him, examining the repair work. The leather was old but well-maintained, like everything her father had owned. He had believed in taking care of things, making them last. How long before the fence is finished? 3 days, maybe 4. They are working fast. Miguel paused, choosing his words carefully. You could stop it, talk to him, make an agreement without the fence. He doesn't want an agreement, he wants a dividing line. Olivia handed back the bridle. Fine, let him have his fence. I'll manage my half and he can manage his. Come spring, we'll see who does better. But even as she said it, she knew it was foolish pride talking. The homestead had succeeded because it was run as a single operation with careful planning and shared resources. Dividing it would make everything harder. From managing the cattle herd to maintaining the buildings to surviving the brutal Nevada winter that was already sending cold winds down from the mountains at night. The fence went up over the next 4 days, a stark line of wooden posts and wire that cut across the valley like a wound. Olivia watched its progress from her kitchen window each morning, coffee cup in hand, trying not to feel like her father's legacy was being torn in half. The cattle noticed it immediately, confused by the barrier where there had been open range. Her dozen head of breeding stock clustered near the eastern edge, while Everett's slightly larger herd grazed on the western side. On the 5th morning, Olivia woke to find 3 of her cattle had pushed through a weak section of fence and were happily grazing on Everett's land. She was saddling her horse, a gray mare named Dove, when she saw Everett riding toward her property, driving the wayward cattle before him with sharp whistles and expert guidance. Yours, I believe, he called out as he approached. He had his rope ready, keeping the cattle moving with practiced ease. His face was unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. Olivia mounted quickly, moving to help guide the cattle back through the gap in the fence. I'll repair it today, she said, her voice tight. This was humiliating, having to be bailed out on the first week of their divided operations. Wire snapped, Everett observed, examining the break. Probably too much tension when they set it. I'll send one of my men over with extra supplies. I can handle my own repairs. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she was tired of feeling like she needed his help, his expertise, his approval. She had been running this homestead alongside her father for years while Everett was still just a hired hand. The fact that her father had chosen to elevate him in death felt like a judgment on her abilities. Everett's jaw tightened. Suit yourself. He turned his horse, then paused. For what it's worth, I didn't ask for any of this. Your father made his choice and I'm just trying to honor it. By cutting his life's work in half, Olivia gestured at the fence, at the artificial divide between land that had once been whole. This isn't what he wanted. He wanted the homestead to thrive. And it will. Everett's blue eyes were intense, almost challenging, both halves of it. We're both good at what we do, Miss Warren. There's no reason we can't both succeed. He rode off before she could respond, leaving her alone with 3 confused cattle and a broken fence. She spent the rest of the morning repairing the wire, her hands aching from the work, her mind churning with frustration and something else she didn't want to name. The truth was, Everett was right. He hadn't asked for any of this. Her father had thrust them both into an impossible situation, and maybe the fence was his way of trying to make the best of it. But it still felt wrong. October brought the first real cold, frost sparkling on the sagebrush in the mornings and ice forming at the edges of the creek. Olivia spent her days preparing for winter, stocking hay and grain, reinforcing the barn, making sure her cattle were healthy and strong enough to survive the months ahead. She saw Everett doing the same on his half of the property, always working, always moving. They developed an unspoken schedule for using the shared well, alternating days to avoid confrontation. The fence stood between them, a constant reminder of division. It was on a particularly cold morning in mid-October when Olivia discovered the problem with the divided land became more than just philosophical. The creek that ran through the property was running lower than usual, the autumn dry spell taking its toll. On her side, the water barely trickled past the cattle, not nearly enough for her herd and certainly not enough to sustain them through winter. On Everett's side, the geography was slightly more favorable, with a deeper channel that held more water. She stood at the fence line, staring across at the relatively abundant stream on his property, and felt the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. Pride would say she should drill a well on her side, spend money she didn't have to solve a problem that wouldn't exist without the fence. Practicality said she needed to swallow that pride and talk to her rival. The walk to Everett's cabin took 15 minutes, long enough for her to rehearse and discard a dozen different approaches. She settled on directness, figuring it was the only language they both spoke fluently. He answered her knock quickly, and she realized she had never actually been inside his home. It was small but tidy, with a wood stove radiating heat and simple furniture that looked handmade. A book lay open on the table, something by Charles Dickens. Somehow the sight of it surprised her, though she couldn't have said why. "Miss Warren," he said, surprise evident in his voice, "is something wrong? The creek is running low on my side. My cattle need water." The words felt like admitting defeat, but she pushed on. "I need to bring them across to the deeper section once a day until the weather changes." Everett was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. He had taken off his hat, and his dark hair was slightly mussed, making him look younger and less intimidating. "How many head?" 12, plus the horse. That's a lot of traffic across the fence line every day. But he didn't say no, which she took as a good sign. "What are you offering in trade?" Of course. Nothing came free, especially not between rivals. Olivia had anticipated this. "Access to the main barn for your equipment storage. It's larger and better protected than the old shed on your side." "Done." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation she shook it. His palm was calloused, warm, the grip firm but not aggressive. "Bring them over in the mornings. I'll make sure my herd is on the west side so there's no mixing." "Thank you." The words felt strange but also necessary. "I'll start tomorrow." As she turned to leave, he said, "Miss Warren, Olivia." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it stopped her in her tracks. "This doesn't have to be a war. The fence is just wood and wire. We can still be neighbors, still help each other when it's needed." She looked back at him. This man her father had trusted with half of everything, and felt something shift inside her. "Then why did you insist on the fence in the first place?" "Because I thought it would make things clearer." He leaned against the doorframe, looking suddenly tired. "Your father left me this land, but that doesn't mean I belong here. Not really. I'm just a cowboy who got lucky. The fence was supposed to prove I could stand on my own, that I wasn't trying to take advantage of his generosity or yours." The honesty caught her off guard. She had assumed his motives were about control or pride, not insecurity. "You earned every acre," she said quietly. "My father didn't give charity. If he left you that land, it's because you deserved it." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that hadn't existed before. Everett nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Then I guess we're both trying to live up to his expectations." "I guess we are." The daily ritual of moving the cattle across the fence line became part of Olivia's routine. Each morning, she would guide her herd through the gate Everett had installed, let them drink their fill from the deeper section of creek, then bring them back to graze on her land. She saw Everett most mornings during this process, and they developed a habit of exchanging a few words, nothing deep but no longer hostile. He asked about her cattle, she asked about his. He mentioned that one of his horses was coming up lame. She suggested a poultice her father had always used. November arrived with a vengeance, bringing snow that turned the valley white and temperatures that dropped below freezing even at midday. Olivia spent more time in the barn than in her house, making sure the animals were fed and warm. She saw Everett doing the same, his figure dark against the snow as he hauled hay to his herd, checked hooves, broke ice on water troughs. It was during one of these brutal cold snaps that disaster struck. Olivia woke in the night to a sound that chilled her more than any wind, the panicked lowing of cattle in distress. She dressed quickly, pulling on every warm layer she owned, and grabbed a lantern before running out into the darkness. The snow was falling thick and fast, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. She followed the sound to the western fence line and found 3 of her cattle tangled in the wire, having tried to push through during the night in search of shelter from the storm. One was bleeding badly, the wire wrapped around its leg in a way that made her stomach turn. Another was thrashing, making the situation worse with each panicked movement. The third stood nearby, eyes rolling white with fear. Olivia set down the lantern and tried to approach, but the injured animal kicked out, nearly catching her in the ribs. She needed help, needed it now, but the storm was too thick to send for Miguel, and her nearest neighbor besides Everett was 5 miles away. She made the decision in seconds, running toward Everett's cabin and pounding on the door hard enough to hurt her knuckles. He appeared almost immediately, taking in her panicked face and snow-covered clothes in an instant. "Cattle tangled in the fence," she gasped. "One's hurt bad. I can't handle them alone." He didn't waste time with questions, just grabbed his coat and followed her into the storm. Together, they fought their way back to the fence line, where the situation had somehow gotten worse. The injured cow had collapsed, dragging the wire down with her weight, and the second animal was now more trapped than ever. "We need to cut the wire," Everett shouted over the wind. "Hold the lantern steady." He produced wire cutters from his coat pocket and moved in close, speaking in a low, calm voice to the panicked animals. Olivia held the light as steady as she could, watching as he methodically snipped through the wire, freeing first the thrashing animal, then carefully working on the injured one. His hands were steady despite the cold and danger, his focus complete. The injured cow tried to stand once freed, its leg bleeding but bearing weight. Better than Olivia had feared, though it would need tending. "Help me guide them back to your barn," Everett said, already moving. "They need shelter and treatment." Working together, they managed to get all 3 cattle into Olivia's barn. The injured one was limping badly, and once they had light and relative warmth, the damage was more apparent. The wire had cut deep, and the leg was swelling. "I need to clean it and stitch it," Olivia said, already gathering supplies. Her hands were shaking from cold and adrenaline. "Can you hold her?" Everett positioned himself at the cow's head, using his weight and voice to keep the animal calm while Olivia worked. It took nearly an hour to clean and close the wounds, to wrap the leg and administer what medicine she had. By the time she finished, dawn was breaking gray and cold through the storm. "That was close," Everett said, straightening up with a wince. He had a scratch across his cheek from where the wire had caught him, blood dried on his jaw. "Another hour in that cold and you would have lost her. I would have lost her without your help." Olivia looked at him directly, making sure he heard the gratitude in her voice. Thank you. For coming out in the storm, for knowing what to do. Thank you. He met her eyes, and in the dim light of the barn, something shifted. She saw him not as her rival or her father's favorite or the man who had divided her inheritance, but simply as Everett. A man who had run into a blizzard to help her without hesitation, who had worked beside her with skill and courage, who was now looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Olivia, he said quietly, that fence nearly killed your cattle tonight. What if next time it's worse? What if one of us gets hurt trying to work around it? She knew what he was suggesting, could feel the offer hanging in the air between them. You want to take it down? I want to stop pretending we're not on the same land, trying to do the same work. He took a step closer, snow melting in his dark hair. Your father didn't divide this homestead to make us enemies. I think he was hoping we would figure out how to run it together. As partners. Partners, she repeated, testing the word. It felt different than rivals, than neighbors, than two people forced into an impossible situation. It felt like possibility. Equal partners, equal, he confirmed. Your knowledge and my work, your inheritance and my experience. No more fence, no more dividing lines. Just the two of us doing what your father trusted us to do. Olivia thought about the long, cold months ahead, about trying to survive winter on half resources with half support. She thought about the fence that had nearly killed her cattle, about the water shortage and the shared equipment, and all the ways their division made everything harder. But more than that, she thought about the man standing in front of her, who had proven himself time and again even when she hadn't wanted to see it. All right, she said. Partners, we take down the fence. His smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of relief. I'll start tomorrow. Soon as the storm clears. He didn't leave right away, and she didn't ask him to. They worked together to make sure all the cattle were settled, to bank the fire in the barn stove, to do the 100 small tasks that made up a rancher's morning. It felt natural, working side by side, their movements falling into an easy rhythm as if they had been doing this for years rather than hours. When Everett finally headed back to his cabin, the storm was easing, the snow falling in gentle flakes rather than the angry blizzard of the night. Olivia watched him go from her kitchen window, coffee cup warming her hands, and felt something that had been tight in her chest finally loosen. True to his word, Everett started removing the fence the next day. Olivia came out to help, and together they pulled up posts, rolled wire, dismantled the barrier that had stood between them for nearly 2 months. The work was hard and cold, their breath fogging in the winter air, but there was satisfaction in it. Each post removed felt like a small victory, a step toward something better. Tell me about him, Everett said during a break, both of them sitting on the fence rails they had just removed. Your father, I mean, before he got sick. Olivia was surprised by the question but found herself answering. He was strong, not just physically, though he was that too when he was younger, strong in his convictions. He believed in this land and making something permanent out here. My mother died when I was 8, fever that swept through Piotch that winter. After that, it was just the two of us. He taught me everything, never treated me like I was less capable because I was a girl. He talked about you all the time, Everett said. How smart you were, how dedicated, how proud he was that you chose to stay rather than go east where things were easier. Did he talk about why he left you half of everything? The question had been burning in her for months, and suddenly she needed to know. Everett was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. He said he was giving me a home, but he was really giving me a responsibility. He knew you were strong enough to run this place alone, but he also knew you shouldn't have to. And he knew I was good at the work but needed a reason to put down roots, to stop drifting. He was giving us both what we needed, even if we were too stubborn to see it. He was manipulating us. But there was no heat in Olivia's words, just a kind of wondering acceptance. He was being smart. Everett turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious, and maybe he saw something we didn't. What's that? That we could be good for each other. Good partners. The way he said partners made her heart skip, made her wonder if he meant more than just the business arrangement. But before she could examine that thought too closely, Carlos came riding up with news that one of the cattle on the western range was having trouble calving. They worked together through the afternoon, helping bring a new calf into the world despite the cold. It was messy, exhausting work, but when it was done and the calf was standing on wobbly legs, Olivia felt the same sense of accomplishment she always did at these moments. Life continuing, the herd growing, the ranch surviving another day, Everett was grinning, his face flushed with cold and effort. First birth of the season, that's good luck. We could use some of that. Olivia found herself smiling back, caught up in his enthusiasm. Somewhere in the past few weeks, she had stopped seeing him as her father's replacement and started seeing him as himself. The realization was both unsettling and right. By December, the fence was completely gone, the posts repurposed for other repairs and the wire rolled up for future use. The land looked whole again, the artificial division erased. They established new routines, working together to manage the combined herd, splitting duties based on skill rather than property lines. Everett was better with the horses, so he took on their training and care. Olivia had a gift for reading the cattle, knowing when one was sick or needed special attention. Miguel and Carlos worked for both of them now, the crew feeling more like a family than a collection of individuals. Christmas approached, and with it came the hardest cold they had seen yet. Temperatures plunged below zero, the wind howling down from the mountains with a ferocity that made going outside dangerous. They moved all the cattle into the sheltered valley, using both barns to house the most vulnerable animals. Olivia and Everett took shifts checking on the herd through the night, making sure none were freezing or in distress. It was during one of these nighttime checks, 3 days before Christmas, that Olivia found Everett in the main barn, sitting on a hay bale and staring at nothing. She had come to relieve him for the midnight shift, but he didn't seem to notice her arrival. "Everett," she approached quietly, suddenly worried. "Are you all right?" He looked up, and she saw something raw in his face. "I was just thinking about other Christmases, other places I have been. I have been drifting since I was 16, Miss Warren. Olivia. Working ranches from Texas to Wyoming, never staying more than a season or two. Your father was the first person who made me think about staying, about building something instead of just surviving." She sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Why did you drift?" "No family left. Father died in the war, mother followed a year later from grief or sickness or just giving up. I had an older brother, but he went west after gold and I never heard from him again. So I worked, moved on when things got hard or boring or when I felt like I was getting too attached." He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Your father used to say I was running from something. Maybe he was right." "And now," Olivia asked softly, "are you still running?" "Now I think maybe I've finally found something worth staying for." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "This land, this work, the chance to build something permanent, and you, Olivia. The way you challenge me, the way you push yourself harder than anyone I have ever known. The way you loved your father and love this place and refuse to give up no matter how hard it gets. I think maybe I am done running." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Everett, I need to tell you something. When my father first died, when I learned about the will, I hated you. I thought you had manipulated him, worked your way into his affections to steal my inheritance. But I was wrong. You earned everything he gave you, and more than that, you have proven yourself to be exactly what he saw in you. Someone trustworthy, hardworking, decent. Someone I am proud to call my partner. Just your partner. The question was quiet, almost hesitant, so unlike his usual confidence. Olivia took a breath, knowing she was about to step off a cliff but unable to stop herself. I think you know it's more than that. I think it has been for a while now, maybe since that night in the blizzard when you came without hesitation. Maybe even before that. I just didn't want to admit it. Everett reached out, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that contrasted with his calloused palm. I have been half in love with you since the day I met you, watching you work beside your father like you were born to this life. And I have been fully in love with you since you stood up to me about that damned fence. All fire and determination. I wanted to tear it down from the day it went up, not because it was impractical, but because it felt like I was building a wall between myself and the only person I have ever wanted to be close to. She kissed him then, closing the distance between them with a certainty that surprised her. His lips were warm despite the cold, his arms coming around her to pull her close. It was a kiss that tasted like coming home, like finding something she hadn't known she was searching for. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. My father knew, she whispered. That's why he did it, not to divide us but to force us to figure out how to come together. Clever man, Everett said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Though I could have done without the months of misery first. Where would be the fun in that? She kissed him again, softer this time, savoring it. Besides, we needed the fence to realize we didn't want it. They stayed in the barn until dawn, talking and kissing and making plans for a future that suddenly looked bright, despite the brutal winter surrounding them. When the sun finally rose, painting the snow gold and pink, Everett stood and pulled her to her feet. Olivia Warren, he said formally, though his eyes were dancing. Would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you properly, with full intentions of making you my wife if you will have me? Court me, she raised an eyebrow. We live 50 yards apart and run a ranch together. I think we are a bit past courting. Humor me. I want to do this right. He was serious now, his hands holding hers. You deserve flowers and pretty words and someone who treats you like you are precious. Not just a business partner or a fellow rancher, but a woman I love and want to spend my life with. Her throat felt tight with emotion. Yes, court me, love me, marry me. Yes to all of it. Christmas that year was the best Olivia could remember. She and Everett had dinner together in the main house. A simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, but it felt like a feast. Miguel and Carlos joined them, and they shared stories and laughter late into the night. Everett had carved her a small wooden box, intricate and beautiful, perfect for the few pieces of jewelry her mother had left her. She gave him a new pair of leather gloves, lined with wool she had spent weeks preparing. They were practical gifts, but the meaning behind them was anything but. January brought more cold and snow, but also a new ease between them. They still worked from dawn to dusk, still faced all the challenges of ranching in winter, but now they faced them together in every sense. Everett started spending more time in the main house, his presence becoming natural and right. They fell into domestic rhythms alongside the ranching ones, cooking meals together, reading by the fire in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. It was late January when Everett brought up the future more concretely. They were in the barn, checking on the pregnant cows that would start calving in earnest come spring. The air was cold but still, a break in the constant wind that had battered them for weeks. I was thinking we should get married in the spring, he said, his tone casual but his hands betraying nervousness as they checked a cow's condition. After calving season, when things settled down a bit, we could have the ceremony in Piotch. Let the whole town know that the Warren homestead is now officially a family operation. Olivia paused in her work, looking at him across the cow's back. You are assuming I have said yes to a proposal you have not actually made yet. I thought I did that at Christmas. But he was grinning, catching her meaning. He moved around the cow, pulling something from his pocket. It was a ring, simple silver with a small blue stone. This was my mother's, only thing of hers I kept through all the drifting. I have been carrying it for years, never thinking I would have someone to give it to. Olivia Warren, you are the strongest, smartest, most infuriating woman I have ever known, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? She looked at the ring, at his hopeful face, at the life they were building together out of grief and stubbornness, and something deeper than either. Yes, absolutely yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, the blue stone catching the lamplight. Then he kissed her, deep and thorough, and she let herself sink into it, into him, into the promise of a future she couldn't have imagined 6 months ago. February brought a thaw, the temperatures rising enough that the snow began to melt and the creek to run full again. They used the respite to complete necessary repairs, to prepare for spring, and to plan their wedding. It would be small, just a handful of friends from Piotch and the crew from the ranch. The minister who served the mining town had agreed to perform the ceremony, and they set the date for early April, after the worst of the calving was done, but before the real work of summer began. But before they could reach that spring wedding, winter had one more trial for them. In early March, a blizzard struck with a violence that exceeded anything they had seen all season. The wind was so strong it ripped boards off the barn, and the snow fell so thick and fast that visibility dropped to nothing. They moved all the cattle they could into shelter, but a dozen head were caught out in the western range when the storm hit. We have to bring them in, Olivia shouted over the wind. They were in the main barn, the building shaking with each gust. They will die out there. We will die if we go out in that, Everett countered, but she could see he was already calculating risks, already preparing to do exactly what she suggested. Olivia, we can't see 10 feet. We could get lost, freeze to death ourselves. Those cattle are our future, our livelihood. We can't just abandon them. She was already pulling on extra layers, wrapping her scarf tight. I am going. You can stay if you want. Like hell. He was beside her, gearing up as well. But we do this smart. Rope tied between us so we do not get separated. Stay close to landmarks. Turn back if it gets worse. They ventured out into the storm, and within minutes Olivia understood the true danger. The wind was a physical force, pushing her sideways, trying to rip the breath from her lungs. The cold was beyond anything she had experienced, burning exposed skin in seconds. But Everett was there, solid and steady, the rope between them a lifeline in the white chaos. They found the cattle huddled in a draw, snow piling against them in drifts. Getting them moving took precious time, each minute another chance for disaster. Olivia's fingers went numb even through her gloves, and she could barely feel her feet. Everett worked beside her, shouting encouragement to the reluctant cattle, using his horse to push them toward safety. The journey back to the barn took an eternity. Several times Olivia was sure they were lost, that they had drifted off course and would wander until they froze. But Everett kept them oriented, his sense of direction uncanny even in the blinding snow. When the barn finally materialized out of the white, Olivia almost wept with relief. They got the cattle inside, counting to make sure they had found all of them. 11 of the 12, which meant one was still out there, probably already dead. But they had saved what they could, and more importantly, they had survived. "Never again," Everett said, pulling her close once they were back in the house, both of them shaking from cold and exhaustion. "Never again do we risk ourselves like that. No cattle are worth losing you. We made it. We are all right." But she was shaking, the fear hitting her now that the crisis was past. They had come so close to dying out there, to throwing away their future for a dozen cows. "Marry me now," Everett said suddenly. "Not in April, not after calving. Now, tonight." "I don't want to wait anymore, don't want to spend another day not being your husband." Olivia pulled back to look at him, seeing the fierce determination in his face. "We can't get a minister out here in this storm. Then we will say the words ourselves. Before God and this land and the life we have built. I want to be your husband, Olivia. I want you to be my wife. I don't need a church or a town full of witnesses to make that real." She thought about the dress she had been sewing, about the small celebration they had planned. None of it mattered as much as the man in front of her, as the commitment they were already living. "All right. Yes, let's do it." They stood in front of the fireplace, hands clasped, and spoke vows to each other in the flickering light. Everett promised to love her, to work beside her, to honor her strength and support her when she faltered. Olivia promised the same, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. They had no rings beyond the one he had already given her, no official words or legal documents. But when they kissed as husband and wife, it felt more binding than any ceremony could have been. The storm raged outside for 3 more days, but inside they were warm and together. They made love for the first time in her bed, learning each other with gentle touches and whispered words. It was sweet and awkward and perfect, exactly what Olivia had dreamed of, even when she hadn't let herself acknowledge those dreams. When the storm finally broke and they ventured outside, they found the missing cow had survived, sheltered in a cluster of rocks on the eastern range. It felt like an omen, a promise that they could weather anything as long as they stayed together. Spring came with a rush of green and warmth that felt like blessing after the brutal winter. The cattle calved successfully, adding 23 healthy offspring to their herd. Everett proved just as capable at helping with births as he was at every other aspect of ranching, and Olivia found herself constantly grateful for his partnership. The land bloomed around them, wildflowers carpeting the hills in yellow and purple, the creek running full and clear. They still had the official ceremony in April, wanting to make their marriage legal in the eyes of the law. The minister from Piach performed a simple service in the church, with Miguel and Carlos as witnesses, and a handful of townspeople in attendance. Olivia wore the dress she had finished, simple cream cotton with lace at the collar, and Everett wore his best shirt and new vest. The ring he had given her in winter was now matched with a silver band on his own finger, both of them symbols of commitment already proven. The celebration afterward was small but joyful. They danced in the town hall, Everett proving surprisingly graceful, and ate a meal prepared by the town's best cook. Friends and neighbors offered congratulations and gifts, practical things like tools and preserves and seeds for the garden. It felt right, this community acknowledgement of what they had already claimed for themselves. That night, back at their homestead, their home, Everett carried her over the threshold of the main house as if she weighed nothing. "Welcome home, Mrs. Bishop," he said, kissing her thoroughly. "I was already home," Olivia replied, but she was smiling. "But I like the sentiment." Summer was busy with all the work a ranch demanded, but it was good work, satisfying in a way it had never been when Olivia was struggling alone or competing with Everett. They built a proper addition onto the main house, turning it from a bachelor's cabin into a real family home. They expanded the cattle operation, buying breeding stock from a rancher in California who was retiring. They broke new horses, mended miles of fencing along the property boundaries, and planned for the future with confidence they had earned through hard work and harder lessons. It was in late July that Olivia first suspected she might be pregnant. She waited another month to be sure, then told Everett one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Nevada hills gold and red. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Come winter, you are going to be a father." The joy on his face was incandescent. "Truly, you are certain as I can be. I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been sick in the mornings." She leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her protectively. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He kissed the top of her head, his voice thick with emotion. "A baby, our child. God, Olivia, a year ago I was alone and drifting, and now I have you and a home and soon a family. I do not know what I did to deserve such blessings. You worked for them. You earned them." She turned to kiss him properly, savoring the taste of his joy. "We both did." The pregnancy progressed well through the fall, Olivia continuing to work the ranch even as her body changed. Everett became almost comically protective, trying to keep her from lifting anything heavy or riding too hard. She tolerated it because she knew it came from love, but she also firmly maintained that being pregnant did not make her fragile. Women have been having babies and working ranches for generations. She told him when he tried to insist she stay in bed one morning in October. "I am healthy and strong, and I will not spend the next 4 months acting like an invalid. You are carrying our child, that makes you precious cargo." But he relented, knowing better than to push too hard. She had taught him during their months together that she made her own decisions about her capabilities. November brought the first snow, and the anniversary of the night when everything between them had begun to change. Everett surprised her by riding into town and returning with a gift, a beautiful shawl woven from the softest wool, dyed a deep blue that matched her eyes. "For when you sit up with the baby on cold nights," he explained, wrapping it around her shoulders. "I want you to be warm and comfortable." "It is beautiful." Olivia pulled him down for a kiss, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, my love." December arrived, bringing memories of the previous year's hardships and the joy that had grown from them. They celebrated their first Christmas as a married couple with quiet happiness, grateful for how far they had come. Olivia's pregnancy was obvious now, her belly round and the baby active, kicking hard enough that Everett could feel it when he placed his hand on her stomach. "Strong like the mother," he said one night, feeling a particularly vigorous kick. "Going to be a handful. Good. This world needs strong people." Olivia covered his hand with hers, the two of them connected to the life they had created. "Especially out here." January brought more snow and the beginning of Olivia's final months of pregnancy. She was larger now, moving more carefully, and she reluctantly agreed to limit her outdoor work to the absolute essentials. Everett hired an additional hand for the winter, a young man named Thomas who was learning the ranching trade. Between him, Miguel, and Carlos, they managed to keep the operation running smoothly while Olivia focused on preparing for the baby. She spent her days sewing tiny clothes, organizing the small room they had designated as the nursery, and reading everything she could find about childbirth and infant care. Her mother had died when she was too young to remember these preparations, so she was making her own way, relying on the wisdom of other ranch wives and her own instincts. It was on a cold February morning, with snow falling softly outside the windows, that Olivia went into labor. The pain started slow, almost gentle, but built quickly in intensity. Everett sent Carlos racing to town to fetch the midwife, an experienced woman named Mrs. Henderson who had delivered half the babies in Piach. Then he stayed by Olivia's side, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her forehead, being exactly what she needed. "You are doing wonderfully," he told her during a particularly hard contraction. "You are so strong, Olivia, so brave." "Easy for you to say," she gasped, but she appreciated his presence more than she could express. Some men left their wives to labor alone, considering it women's work. Everett stayed, never flinching even when her grip on his hand was tight enough to bruise Mrs. Henderson arrived in the early afternoon, taking charge with calm efficiency. She examined Olivia, pronounced everything progressing normally, and settled in to wait. Labor continued for hours, the pain growing until Olivia thought she couldn't bear any more. But then the midwife was telling her to push, and Everett was supporting her shoulders, and suddenly there was a new sound in the room, the wail of a baby announcing its arrival. "A boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket and placing him in Olivia's arms. "Healthy lungs, good color. Congratulations." Olivia looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and dark hair, and felt a love so fierce it stole her breath. He was perfect, beautiful, theirs. She looked up at Everett and saw tears streaming down his face. "We have a son," he whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The infant's fingers closed around it instinctively, holding on. "Hello, little one. I am your father." "What should we name him?" Olivia asked, unable to look away from their child. Everett thought for a moment, his expression tender. "What was your father's name?" James Warren." She understood what he was suggesting, felt her own eyes fill with tears. "You want to name him after my father. He brought us together, gave us this life. Seems right to honor that." Everett kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "James Bishop, if that suits you." "It suits me perfectly." Olivia held their son close, feeling the weight of him, the reality of this new life they had created and would now protect and nurture. "Welcome to the world, James. You have no idea how wanted you are." The weeks after James's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant demands. Olivia was grateful for Everett's involvement, his willingness to walk the floor with a crying baby at 3 in the morning, to change diapers and heat bottles when her milk wasn't enough. They were partners in this as they were in everything, stumbling through together with love and determination. Spring arrived, bringing the familiar rush of new life and work. James was 2 months old, starting to smile and show his personality. He was indeed strong-willed, demanding attention and making his displeasure known when he didn't get it fast enough. But he was also joyful, his laugh the most beautiful sound Olivia had ever heard. "He's going to keep us on our toes," Everett observed one evening, holding his son while Olivia prepared dinner. James was grabbing at his father's face, fascinated by the stubble on Everett's jaw. "Already trying to boss me around. He gets that from both of us." Olivia smiled at the picture they made, her strong cowboy husband cradling their infant son with such care. "We are both pretty stubborn, true enough." Everett stood walking with James to the window. "Look out there, son. That is all ours. Your mother and I built this, and someday it will be yours. This land, this life, all of it. You are going to grow up knowing you belong somewhere, that you have roots. You are going to have what I never did." Olivia came to stand beside them, wrapping her arm around Everett's waist. The view from the window showed the ranch in full spring bloom, the cattle grazing peacefully, the barn standing strong, the land green and gold under the Nevada sun. It was everything her father had dreamed of, everything she had fought for, everything she and Everett had built together. "He is going to have parents who love each other and love him," she said softly. That is the greatest inheritance we can give him. Summer brought more growth to the ranch and to their family. James grew quickly, his dark hair lightening to brown, his eyes settling into a clear blue like his father's. He was an easy baby most of the time, content to be carried in a sling while Olivia did lighter chores, sleeping soundly through the day's noise and activity. Everett built a sturdy crib that would last for multiple children, both of them already talking about expanding their family. "I want at least 3, Olivia said one evening, the two of them sitting on the porch while James napped inside. "Maybe 4. I want as many as you are willing to give me." Everett pulled her close, his hand resting on her waist. "I love being a father, love watching you as a mother. We could fill this house with children and it would still feel empty if you were not in it." Such pretty words from a cowboy. But she was smiling, leaning into his touch. Their physical relationship had resumed after James's birth, and if anything it was better than before, deeper and more meaningful for the life they had created together. By fall, the ranch was thriving beyond anything Olivia had imagined a year ago. The cattle herd was healthy and growing. They had broken and sold several horses for good prices, and they had even begun to discuss expanding their land holdings. The homestead that had once been divided now stood as a testament to what partnership could achieve. It was in October, with the leaves turning gold and the air crisp with approaching winter, that Olivia realized she was pregnant again. This time she told Everett immediately, having no reason to wait. They celebrated quietly, both of them thrilled at the prospect of another child but also aware of the work that lay ahead. "James will be barely a year old when the new baby comes," Olivia calculated. "We are going to have our hands very full. Good thing we make a great team." Everett kissed her, his hand already moving to her stomach even though there was nothing to feel yet. "2 babies under 2 years old, we must be crazy." "Probably," Olivia agreed, "but it is a good kind of crazy." The winter passed more easily than the previous ones, partly because they were more experienced and partly because the weather was milder. James grew into a toddler, taking his first steps in January and filling the house with his delighted laughter. Olivia's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and by spring she was obviously expecting again. Their second child, a girl they named Grace after Everett's mother, was born in late May of 1881. The birth was easier than James's had been, and Grace was a calm baby from the start, content to sleep and eat and observe the world with wide eyes. James was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her constantly under careful supervision. "Gentle," Everett coached his son, showing him how to stroke the baby's soft cheek. "That is your sister. You have to take care of her." "Baby," James said proudly, one of his few clear words. He patted Grace's hand, delighted when her fingers wrapped around his. Watching her husband with their 2 children, Olivia felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. This life they had built together was more than she had dared to dream during those dark days after her father's death. The ranch, the family, the partnership with a man she loved deeply, all of it felt like grace, like blessings earned through hard work and faith. The years that followed fell into a rhythm of seasons and growth. The children thrived, James growing into a sturdy boy who loved the horses and followed his father everywhere. Grace proving to be thoughtful and observant, noticing things others missed. They had a 3rd child in 1883, another boy they named Samuel, and discussed whether they would have more. 4 seems like a good number, Olivia said, nursing Samuel while watching James and Grace play in the yard. She was 30 years old now, still strong but feeling the toll of 3 pregnancies in 4 years. Enough to help run the ranch someday, not so many we can't give them all attention. "Whatever you want, my love." Everett was repairing a saddle, his hands busy while they talked. "Though I will admit I would not mind one more daughter. Grace needs a sister. We will see what God provides." Olivia smiled at him, at this man who had become the center of her world. They had been married over 4 years now, together even longer, and she loved him more with each passing day. He was a good husband, a wonderful father, an excellent partner in every way that mattered. The ranch continued to prosper. They expanded their land holdings, buying an adjacent parcel when the owner decided to move back east. They upgraded their breeding stock, built a second barn, and hired more permanent hands as the operation grew. Miguel had become their foreman in all but name, his experience and steady judgment invaluable. Carlos had married and built a small house on the property, his wife Maria helping with the children and the household work. It was in the fall of 1884, with Olivia pregnant for the 4th time and the ranch running smoothly, that they received unexpected news. A lawyer from Piach rode out to the homestead with information about a long-lost relative of Everett's, that older brother who had gone west years ago. He had died in Montana, but not before making a small fortune in silver and leaving it to his only known relative. "It is not a huge amount," the lawyer explained, showing them the paperwork, "but substantial enough, about $3,000. Everett stared at the documents, clearly stunned. "I thought he was dead. I have not heard from him in over 15 years. He tried to find you, apparently. Left instructions that if anything happened to him, his estate should be tracked down and given to you." The lawyer tapped the papers. "It is all legal and proper. The money is yours to do with as you please." After the lawyer left, Olivia and Everett sat together on the porch, processing this unexpected windfall. $3,000 was more money than they had ever seen at once, enough to make significant changes to their lives. "We could expand even more," Everett said slowly. "Buy more land, more cattle. Really build this into something substantial for our children. Or we could put some aside for their education," Olivia suggested. "Make sure they have opportunities beyond ranching if they want them." She paused, thinking. "And maybe we could do something to honor both our fathers, something that would make a difference." They talked long into the night, making plans and dreaming together. In the end, they decided to split the money 3 ways. A third would go into expanding the ranch, buying the breeding stock and equipment they needed to take their operation to the next level. A third would be saved for their children's future, whether that was education, land of their own, or whatever opportunities arose. And the final third would fund a scholarship for young people in Piach who wanted to learn ranching or other trades, something that would honor both the father who had believed in hard work and the brother who had made his own way in the world. Their 4th child, another daughter they named Helen, was born in March of 1885. The birth was harder than the others, and afterward the doctor advised Olivia that she should probably not have more children. At 33, after 4 babies in 6 years, her body needed rest. Olivia agreed, grateful for the 4 healthy children she had and unwilling to risk her life when they had so much to live for. 4 is perfect," Everett assured her, holding baby Helen while Olivia recovered. 2 boys, 2 girls. Our family is complete. No regrets." Olivia asked, searching his face. "Not a single one." He leaned down to kiss her gently. "You have given me everything I could ever want, a home, children, a purpose. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." The children grew and the ranch prospered. James showed an early aptitude for working with cattle, his patience and instincts already apparent at age 6. Grace loved the horses like her father did, fearless in the saddle by the time she was 5. Samuel was still young, but he showed signs of being the scholar of the family, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. And Helen, as a toddler, was already showing the stubborn determination that reminded everyone of her mother. It was in the spring of 1887, with the children ranging from 2 to 8 years old, that Olivia and Everett took a rare day away from the ranch. They rode up into the hills, to the spot where the old fence line had stood, now just a memory marked by occasional posts they had never bothered to remove. 8 years, Olivia said, dismounting and walking to where she remembered the fence dividing their land. Has it really been that long since you built this? Nearly 9 since your father died. Everett joined her, taking her hand. Does it still hurt thinking about him? Always. But it is a different kind of hurt now. I miss him, wish he could have met his grandchildren. But I am also grateful for what he gave us, the way he forced us to work out how to be together. She squeezed Everett's hand. The fence was terrible, but tearing it down was the best thing we ever did. Second best, Everett corrected. The best thing was realizing we loved each other and deciding to do something about it. They stood together, looking out over the land that was theirs, built by work and love and partnership. In the distance, they could see the ranch buildings, smoke rising from the chimneys, the cattle grazing peacefully. It was exactly what her father had dreamed of, what she and Everett had built together through hardship and joy. You ever think about how different things could have been? Olivia asked. If my father had left you nothing, or if he had left you everything, if we had both been too stubborn to tear down the fence. Sometimes. But then I remember that things worked out exactly as they were supposed to. Everett pulled her close and she went willingly, resting her head on his shoulder. We were both too proud, too independent. We needed something to force us together, to make us see that we were better as partners than as rivals. Your father knew that. The fence was a test and we passed by tearing it down. Before winter, Olivia remembered, smiling. You tore it down by winter, just like the title of this story would have said if someone was writing it down. What? Everett looked confused. Nothing, just thinking out loud. She turned in his arms to kiss him, deep and thorough, tasting love and home and forever. Take me back to the house, Cowboy. Our children will be wondering where we are. They rode back together, side by side as they did everything, the land spreading out around them in spring green and gold. The homestead they reached was whole, undivided, exactly as it should be. The fence was gone, torn down by winter almost a decade ago, and in its place was a life built on partnership, love, and the kind of deep connection that only comes from choosing each other every single day. Years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. The children grew taller and more capable, taking on real responsibilities as they matured. James, at 12, could already handle a full day's work alongside the men. Grace, at 11, could break a horse with patience and skill that made her father proud. Samuel, at 9, kept the ranch accounts with a precision that Olivia found both impressive and slightly unnerving. And Helen, at 7, was already showing signs of having inherited her mother's fierce determination and her father's easy way with animals. The ranch itself had grown into one of the most successful operations in the region. They ran over 200 head of cattle now, had a reputation for quality horses, and employed 6 full-time hands plus seasonal workers during busy times. The scholarship fund they had established in honor of their fathers had helped 14 young people get started in various trades, a legacy that felt as important as any financial success. It was in the summer of 1892, on their 13th wedding anniversary, that Everett surprised Olivia with a gift that took her breath away. He led her outside after dinner, the children giggling because they were clearly in on the secret, and showed her a beautiful wooden sign he had carved and painted. Warren Bishop Ranch, it read in elegant letters. Established 1879. Built on partnership. I thought it was time we made it official, Everett explained, his arm around her waist. This is not just your father's homestead anymore. It is ours, yours and mine, what we built together. The name should reflect that. Olivia traced the letters with her fingers, emotion thick in her throat. It is perfect. Everything about this life is perfect. Not perfect, Everett corrected gently, but ours. Earned and fought for and chosen every day, that is better than perfect. They hung the sign at the entrance to the property where the road met their land. It stood as a declaration and a promise, visible to everyone who passed. This was the Warren Bishop Ranch, built by two people who had started as rivals and become partners, lovers, husband and wife, parents to 4 remarkable children. The family gathered for a photograph that summer, standing in front of the main house with the Nevada hills rising behind them. Olivia stood with Everett's arm around her, their children arranged around them. James, tall and serious at 13, already looking like the man he would become. Grace, lovely and confident at 12, her eyes bright with intelligence and mischief. Samuel, thoughtful and clever at 10, holding a book even for the photograph. And Helen, all wild energy and joy at 8, barely able to stand still long enough for the picture to be taken. Looking at that photograph years later, Olivia would remember that moment as one of perfect contentment. They had overcome so much to get there, from the grief of her father's death to the division of the homestead, to the fence that had nearly kept them apart. They had learned to work together, to love each other, to build something bigger than either of them could have created alone. The children eventually grew up and made their own choices. James took over the ranching operation, expanding it further and eventually building a house on the property for himself and the young woman he married. Grace married a horse breeder from California and moved west, though she visited often and stayed deeply connected to the family. Samuel used his scholarship fund to attend university back east, studying agriculture and business before returning to help modernize the ranch operations. Helen, true to her nature, became a veterinarian, one of the few women in the profession, and practiced in Piotch while living on the family land. Everett and Olivia grew old together, their hair graying and their faces weathering, but their love only deepening with time. They sat on the porch most evenings, watching the sunset paint the Nevada hills in shades of gold and red, talking about the day's work and the lives of their children and grandchildren. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, but Everett and Olivia remained active and involved, their experience and wisdom still valuable. It was on their 50th wedding anniversary, in the spring of 1942, that the whole family gathered for a celebration. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house, the noise and laughter a testament to the legacy Olivia and Everett had built. They renewed their vows under the open sky, surrounded by family and the land they had spent a lifetime caring for. 50 years, Everett said during the ceremony, his voice still strong despite his 75 years. 50 years of waking up beside the most remarkable woman I have ever known. 50 years of partnership, of building something together, of choosing each other every single day. Olivia Warren Bishop, I love you more now than I did on the day we married, and I thank God for every moment we have had together. Olivia, at 71, felt tears stream down her weathered face. You made me believe in the possibility of happiness after loss. You showed me that pride could be set aside for something better, that rivalry could transform into love. You tore down the fence that divided us, and in doing so, you opened a path to the most beautiful life I could have imagined. I love you, Everett Bishop, and I thank my father every day for having the wisdom to bring us together." They kissed as their family cheered, and in that moment, Olivia thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that gunshot morning in 1879 when the fence was going up, through the long winter when it came down, through every challenge and joy and ordinary day in between. They had built a life together, a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The fence was long gone, torn down by winter almost 60 years ago. But what had grown in its place was more valuable than any division of property or pride. It was love, deep and abiding, tested by time and strengthened by choice. It was family, multiple generations connected by blood and story and shared history. It was home, not just a place but a feeling, a belonging that transcended ownership or inheritance. Everett and Olivia lived to see their 60th anniversary, an achievement rare enough that it warranted an article in the Piatch newspaper. They passed away within months of each other in 1943, Everett first in the summer and Olivia following that fall, as if she couldn't bear to be without him for long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names, dates, and a single line: partners in all things. The Warren Bishop Ranch continued under family management for generations, the sign at the entrance maintained and repainted but never changed. The land that had once been divided by a fence remained whole, a testament to the power of tearing down barriers and choosing partnership over pride. And in the family stories passed down through the years, there was always the tale of the fence that stood for barely 2 months before love found a way to tear it down. The legacy of Olivia Warren and Everett Bishop lived on in their descendants, in the land they had nurtured, and in the simple truth they had discovered together. That sometimes the best things in life come from breaking down the walls we build, from reaching across divides to find common ground, from having the courage to transform rivalry into partnership and partnership into love. They had started as adversaries, forced together by circumstance and inheritance. They had become partners through necessity and choice. And they had ended as soulmates, two people who had found in each other everything they needed to build a life of meaning, purpose, and deep, abiding joy. The fence came down by winter, but what rose in its place lasted forever. A love story written in the dust and sagebrush of Nevada, in the lives of their children and grandchildren, and in the enduring truth that some barriers are meant to be torn down so that something better can grow in their place.